of 60 Minutes because a football game once again ran over into our time. The story was about Iceland. Now, if you're like a lot of people around here, you may be saying, Iceland? What's with Iceland? Well, first off, the Viking settlers 1,100 years ago knew Iceland had some lush living space, but not much. And they didn't want a lot of people going there. They figured they'd scare people off if they called it Iceland. Their next landfall west was nearly all ice. They wanted people to settle there, so they called it Greenland. Thus, the Vikings may have been the world's first public relations people. But that's another story.
We arrived expecting to find Iceland a frozen island where they play chess a lot and fight the British over fish. Parts of it are frozen. But the average temperature is the same as that for New York State. And it wasn't long before we were saying, the first of many times, you've got to be kidding.
All right. What do you mean, no? No, it's a tip for you. Thank you very much.
We don't take tips.
What?
We don't take tips.
There is no tipping for anything in Iceland. And that's just for starters. For instance, names. They're in love with first names. Look up a friend in the phone book, and you'll find him listed alphabetically by his first name. And there's a law that a son's last name must incorporate his father's first name.
My father's name was Herman Jonsson. My son's name is Jón Hermannsson. No, sorry.
It even confuses you, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, well.
Well, let's start over. Your father's name was?
My father's name was Jón Hermannsson. My father's name was Herman Jonsson. My name is Jón Hermannsson, and my son's name is Herman Jonsson.
Jan's daughter's last name would be Jansdottir, and she would keep it even if she got married. And most of the daughters of Iceland look like they came from the cover of Vogue. We're told the original Vikings, on their way to Iceland, captured the most beautiful woman in each European village they raided. There is no prostitution here, no real pornography. Their explanation, quite simply, who needs it?
Is premarital sex encouraged?
No.
Discouraged?
No. Nobody thinks sex is a big thing. It's just something that comes natural, like.
Some 40% of firstborn children are born out of wedlock with no stigma. You'd think that would make for a population explosion. But in truth, only 200,000 people live here, half of them in Reykjavik, the northernmost capital city in the world. Because of their isolation, and because they discourage foreign immigration, their race is almost pure Nordic. So is their language. A Viking of 11 centuries ago could understand a television newscaster of today. Their TV is black and white and occasional. They broadcast only about 3 hours a day, never on Thursday, and never during the month of July. That's dictated by the government, which is socialistic. The Icelandic parliament, the Althing, is the oldest sitting parliament in the world. There are few signs of poverty or wealth. This is about the worst housing we could find in Reykjavik. This about the best. A salary of $10,000 puts you in the 35% tax bracket. There's a 20% sales tax on everything. Everything. Icelanders are perhaps the most literate society in the world. Compare New York City, with 8 million people and 3 daily newspapers, to Reykjavik, a city of 100,000 with 7 daily papers.
What's this?
By the time the children get out of school, they know 4 languages. They also know how to work. Hard work is inbred and practiced. When they're not in school, these children are paid a nominal wage to keep city parks beautiful. Younger children are given plots of land by the government to grow family vegetable gardens. Or they might be asked to dig out the house, which takes a little explanation. You see, Iceland sits on a great geological fault. For millions of years, the island has been built like this. Medieval theologians are said to have told the sinners in their flocks, "Get thee to Iceland and know what you face if your ways are not mended." For century upon century, molten lava has been made into land by the sea, or frozen tight by Arctic glaciers that cover much of the interior Iceland. The result, for the most part, is this: hundreds of square miles of wasteland, terrain so forbidding, so difficult to traverse, that our astronauts came here to learn how to walk on the moon. Scattered between the glacial ice and volcanic plains are thin strips of fertile land. It is here the Vikings of 11 centuries ago found refuge for themselves and their descendants. A refuge of sorts. Because if most countries measure their history around wars, Icelanders do it with volcanic eruptions. This one happened 3 years ago, and Jan Hermansson was there.
It's difficult to describe. I mean, the earth is shaking under your feet, and you see this fumes going up and fire coming up of a mountain, a few hundred meters high maybe. And the houses in the foreground, this was, you know, could have been a real catastrophe in the Western Islands.
An entire village of 5,000 escaped without major casualties. That was 3 years ago. This is how the village looks today. And that devotion to hard work may go a long way toward explaining the crime problem in Iceland. There really isn't any. They average less than 1 murder a year. The few policemen are unarmed. And they have one small prison for the whole country.
Well, is the jail always full?
Yeah, it's more or less booked up. Yeah, you have to queue for it in cases. I mean, something like capital murder or some, you know, very serious thing, you go directly to the to jail, but they would probably have to kick somebody else out.
But what if it's for a less serious offense than murder?
Oh, they'd probably ring you up in a couple of years and tell you, well, we've got some space now, so why don't you just come in?
In fact, a visitor here can become mesmerized by a country whose physical beauty is so awesome, whose people keep one foot firmly planted in the past and take life pretty much as it comes. Their isolation has ensured that until now. But slowly the problems of international politics have been creeping up on them. Fish is the national lifeblood. 80 cents of every dollar coming into the country is from fish sold abroad, which of course explains the so-called cod war. These are the gunboats you've heard about. You are looking at half the entire Icelandic fleet. They have no armed forces, just 6 Coast Guard vessels, each armed with an 1892 vintage cannon. In past years, as fishing around the island grew less productive, Iceland tried to extend her control of the fishery farther and farther into the ocean. The British, who had fished there for decades, kept fishing there. So Iceland's Coast Guard mustered its gunboats to cut the enemy's trawler lines, an action to which Her Royal Majesty's Navy took exception. Iceland's gunboats, of course, were no match for the much bigger British frigates. So the Icelandic diplomats played their ace of trumps. If her Western friends didn't hear that bumping of boats, Icelanders knew what would get their attention. Since the Cold War of the late 40s, one of the most important NATO bases in the world has been Iceland. It sits on Russia's front door, watching Soviet aircraft and submarine movements. Last spring, at the height of the latest Cod War, the message from Iceland came clear. NATO countries had better pressure the British out of Icelandic claimed waters, or they could build a raft for their NATO base. Most outside observers agree that the resulting settlement left the Cod score Iceland 1, England 0. Regardless, Icelanders know that the country's future economy can't be just fish. They have to look elsewhere for a money base. And the most obvious place is here. They live on a gold mine of thermal energy. Beneath their island in the volcanic bowels is a virtual sea of superheated water and steam, plus an abundance of hydroelectric power. A small part of the above is harnessed. Most of it is not. An American, accustomed to our perpetual fight against fossil fuel pollution, discovers an energy utopia in Iceland. For instance, this scene, Reykjavik on a cold winter morning. If you think something's missing, you're right. Not one wisp of smoke over the entire city of 100,000. All the buildings are heated by natural hot water. Washing machines and bathtubs use the same water, pumped straight from the ground, and the price is about half what fossil energy would cost. Natural hot water for swimming, 365 days of the year. The air temperature this day was 32 degrees. The water, 90 degrees. Hundreds of greenhouses are built on the thermal grounds for year-round production of fresh vegetables and flowers. And despite reservations by foreign scientists about the feasibility, Icelanders drool at the prospect of selling their excess energy worldwide via satellite. Ivar Gudmundsson is the Icelandic General Counsel in the United States.
I understand that a satellite would be able to transmit energy from Iceland to an area reaching from Boston on the east coast of the United States to Florida, the whole of the Caribbean, the complete South American continent, and into West Africa, part of Portugal and Spain.
It boggles the mind to think of that as a possibility.
It is unbelievable, but what is not unbelievable today?
They want to sell energy by satellite because, quite simply, they don't want a flood of foreigners here. Their race is almost pure, and that's the way they like it. Their country is virtually spotless. Even the gutters are clean, and they've outlawed dogs in Reykjavik to help keep them that way. It's one of the few spots in the world where water can accurately be described as crystal. Iceland is famous for its salmon fishing, and one of the best salmon rivers in the country runs right through Reykjavik. They like to tell you about all that. They love to talk about their history and how the Icelandic language is almost pure because they don't allow it to be polluted with foreign words. About the only thing they're not anxious to show an outsider is their drinking. This liquor store scene is not an everyday thing. They work hard all week. But come Friday, they stock up for what to many will be a lost weekend.
They drink a whole bottle, and there's one thing to it, that if you were invited to a house in this place, most people wouldn't leave until everything is finished that's found around the house. 5 or 6 in the morning, they might not leave before that if there was plenty of booze around.
But even that didn't prepare us for what we filmed under the midnight sun the night of their national holiday. The occasion was a schoolyard dance for kids. The only drinking law enforced is one prohibiting the sale of regular beer, only so-called near beer. So naturally, they drink hard liquor. Hermansson speaks for most Icelanders we talk to about that schoolyard scene.
I'm concerned. I guess most parents would be concerned, but we seem to have a problem there that nobody is really too hot on doing anything about. I mean, we've had this problem for a while. I mean, and of course, as long as we don't do anything about it, it'll get more serious all the time.
They have survived for 11 centuries alone. The rest of us hardly knew they were there. But in recent years, the trickle from outside has begun. First, a political toehold. And now, with cheap energy a fading memory in most countries, the Icelanders are sitting on a commodity that could bring the world to their doorstep. Like a virgin determined to be chaste, they've resisted, so far. But an outsider has to wonder if, when he grows up, will he be able to catch a salmon in Reykjavik?